Setting up. Just preparing live stream. Okay. Something didn't connect at first, but I'm not.
I believe
Yeah.
you're live, Howard.
Um, hmm. Okay.
Oh, well, you were, and now it looks like it stopped.
I don't know. Okay. Hmm. This is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Hello, I am Howard Martin, lead pastor of Empowering Global Ministries. I am here on the mic with Pastor Spears. I was going to say Bishop. Pastor Spears of Faith and Love, Kojic, Church of God in Christ in Fort Worth, Texas. And we are live tonight talking about why Black men should vote. With this impending election coming up, I'm telling you, it is crucial. It is crucial that we get out there and vote. You see that I got my voting sticker on there right now. And I'm telling you right now, it felt so good to go to the polling polls and vote. How did it feel for you, Pastor Spears?
Well, actually, we're going to be bringing our entire congregation to the polls on Sunday. So we're awaiting to take the entire congregation from the pews to the polls on Sunday during early voting. So I will know that wonderful sense of satisfaction on Sunday afternoon.
Okay, good. Okay, you know what, we're gonna start with some context before we get into the content. And after we get into the content, we're gonna get into the breakdown because I think that it's just very important that we realize and recognize the importance of voting. Um, I think we need to understand how crucial it is for especially Black men uh, to vote. We need to look back at the numbers that show just how hard it was to get to where we are today. And I say that because so many people, and I've come in contact with them, who said, "Well, you know what? I'm not even going to vote. What's the use?" And that is just so hurtful when we think about the past. So I just want to give a little bit of context here. I don't know if you're aware of this, but after the 15th Amendment was passed in 1870, did you know that over 500,000 Black men registered to vote across the South? But the progress didn't last long. By the early 20th century, voter suppression laws and Jim Crow practices had reduced the number of Black registered voters to almost zero in many of the southern states. And this is important for us to know this history because when we look at Louisiana, the number of registered voters dropped from 130,000 now in 1896, just over 1,300 in 1904. This was a deliberate and strategic effort to silence the Black voice. That's why it's important to get out there and to vote. And it wasn't until the civil rights movement that we began to see significant, let me say significant improvements culminating in the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by 1969. And we all know Martin Luther King and them, they did that walk. I mean, it was for us today. It wasn't just for them then, but it was for us today. Voter registration for Black citizens in Mississippi had surged for just 6.7% in 1964 to 59.8%, showing how quickly change could happen once barriers are removed. And we're going to get into that. Now, I'm giving you a little bit of past history. I want to deal with some present here, some context here. We are still facing challenges, but you know what? The landscape has changed. According to data from the U.S. Census Bureau, voter turnout among Black men has seen highs and lows. In the 2008 presidential election, nearly 60% of eligible Black men voted, largely driven, I just got to say this again, largely driven by the historic candidacy of our President Barack Obama. Not past, he's still going to be my president forever. This was the highest turnout rate ever recorded for Black men. However, by 2016, that number had dropped to around 54%, a decline of about 6% from 2012. And I just want to just push this just a little bit further. In the 2020 election turnout, surged again, nearly 64% of eligible Black voters turned out. And Black men played a significant role in key states like Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. This demonstrates the power of Black men's votes, especially in swing states. But despite this progress, Black men still vote at lower rates than Black women and other demographic groups, suggesting that more needs to be done to address barriers and encourage participation. So I want to get input here from my co-host, my brother here, and what he's feeling about this, and maybe what I've just said and shared. If he would just come on the mic here and just give us a little bit of insight as we move it along.
Well, Howard, I think the statistics that you bring out are informative and concerning in that there was such a huge price to be paid in order for us to vote. And I think one of the things that affects that is a bit of the misinformation that has tainted the voting process. The idea that when the original civil rights movement was happening and taking place, they understood the value of what they were fighting for and the necessity for those things to be not only theirs, but generational. Unfortunately, because of disenfranchisement and misinformation, many people in the minority community have been convinced that their vote does not have the same value because in many cases we don't understand the long process that change takes.
Right.
And that, your vote today does not ensure a light switch changing, but it does begin an effect, a momentum shift that will manifest if we stay connected to holding those people accountable and following the process, becoming informed. So when we look at those numbers decreasing, we see a prior generation that understood the value to the point that they were willing to risk their lives for the right and the responsibility to vote. But then through misinformation, disenfranchisement, and just confusion, many have lost the understanding of what they have or been tricked out of the power that they had because it was through various forms of propaganda, various forms of information campaigns. They have been convinced that their vote doesn't matter. And now the self-infused misunderstanding that has now become a part of our cultural experience has now caused us to relinquish something that blood was shed for us to have.
And you know what? That's a very valid point. And I understand the frustration, but that's why voting is crucial. Historically, Black men have targeted, like you said, disenfranchised have been disenfranchised for us to keep from voting. There's a reason for that. Our votes are powerful. When we vote, we can influence policies that directly impact our communities. See, like when we think about communities, we need to think about the whole gamut: criminal justice reform, access to health care, education funding. And I want to go back to something else that you said, Pastor Spears, when you talk about disenfranchisement. Voter suppression and disenfranchisement has always been out there in the media and just out there in the public eye, and it's been kind of masked a little bit. Voter ID laws,
Mhm.
these are things that suppress the vote. Strict identification requirements disproportionately impact Black communities more than other communities. Felony disenfranchisement. Black men are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. And in many states, a felony conviction can lead to losing the right to vote. And that's you know I'm just going to keep it 100 as we do on this podcast. Um, is that we need to be very aware and remember that felons are not allowed to vote.
Apparently, in some
Felons,
states they are,
in some states, they are.
and
They're
even
not
run for
allowed to
office.
vote in Texas.
So in some states, they're not only allowed to vote; they're allowed to run for office, even for president.
And you
But
know what? That's exactly what I was trying to get to, but you took us there. Let me jump on that train. Also, redistricting, uh, districting, excuse me, manipulating district boundaries can dilute the voting power of Black communities, making their voice less influential and discouraging participation. And I want to kick it back to you about that, about the disenfranchisement of especially of our Black communities and our Black men.
well, Howard, part of what how this has worked is that we have been convinced that
Mhm.
voting is something that other people do
Yeah.
because they have a vested interest, and voting is only about big issues. But you brought out some points that I don't think we understand. I like to equate voting as more like a marriage ceremony,
Mm,
in that once you've made the decision, you still have to stay committed to those that you've chosen,
that's true.
meaning that the vote
True.
is the beginning.
Yeah.
The
Just the
vote
beginning.
is to say, I'm supporting
Yeah.
this candidate,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to stay in that candidate's experience until they do all the
Oh, that's
things
good.
that they
That's good.
said they were going to do.
Yeah.
So at the altar, I don't say I do and then walk away and never, come back and see them until our anniversary, going, well,
Yeah.
I guess we'll renew vows. But
Yeah.
voting is supposed to be our way of saying we are not only supporting but willing to hold accountable
Right.
someone to represent us. And then we have to be engaged. So part of where the disenfranchised comes in is understanding how economics works, understanding how social policy works.
Hmm.
Social policy does not change overnight.
True.
And the balance of power does not usually let one individual make any major changes.
Right.
That's why we have cooperative government. So, because of that, we may elect someone,
Hmm.
they get into office, but they have to work with a bipartisan group, or they have to work with others that have, and we saw this in Obama's administration,
Right.
obstructionism. And
Right.
because of obstructionism, they hamper everything that that politician that people had faith in is trying to do. Now, after they do that, then they go
Hmm.
back to the minority communities and say things like, well, you see, they didn't do anything for you. Your
Right.
vote is not valued. They didn't take care of any things they promised. They won't admit that those things happened because, as some lawmakers during Obama's administration
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
anything that he puts forward, we're
Right.
not going to let go through.
That's
So it
true.
wasn't that he was not attuned, it was that he was not allowed, because we don't have dictatorships, despite what some
True.
people like to believe. We don't have dictatorships. And so, because he wasn't able to do some of those things through Congress,
Hmm.
then some of those same voices came back and said, see, your vote doesn't matter. Why did you go through all this trouble? Your community didn't change. Nothing was different. So why go back and vote again? And that misinformation is just like the whole idea when you see those
Hmm.
pictures about somebody digging and digging and digging, and they get
Yeah.
like 2 inches away from the jewels and they
Yeah.
turn
Yeah.
around.
Right.
That happens. We cast the vote, but if we don't stay alert, involved, and understand the process, how
Hmm.
many of us are going to city council meetings to see how the votes
Sure.
happen? How many of
Exactly.
us are watching the
Yeah. Yes.
congressional
Yeah.
caucuses to see how the votes are happening?
Yeah.
Actually following the policies to see, just like we're in the current election, and I'm not
It's
showing one
okay.
side or the other,
We're gonna keep it
but
one.
in the current election season, we have candidates speaking about how the border was not secured,
Right.
knowing that they killed a border bill.
Hmm.
Now, they're
Yeah.
not going to tell you they killed the border bill. What they are going to tell you is that the other administration did not protect the border. And
Right.
so it's that half truth and that misinformation that makes others feel as though all that they've done didn't matter. And there was a lot of disenfranchisement and crestfallen people after the Obama administration because they felt like so many things didn't happen, but we
Hmm.
don't take in context so many things were obstructed. And so if we don't stay
Context.
involved, it
Hmm.
allows us to leave off.
Hmm.
And so right when we're at the point of
Hmm.
making real change, getting involved with the local election, your judges, your council, your mayor, your senate, getting involved in those things, we become disenfranchised. And Howard, I worked for elections in one
Hmm.
of my lives when I was working for the school district. I managed the elections for the school district races, which meant I had to work with the Tarrant County Election Office to
Right.
see results. Most elections in the most close elections that affect
Hmm.
us in our neighborhoods are decided by small minorities,
Right.
small number of people that come
Groups.
out to vote because
Right.
so many people don't vote. So you may have a 30% turnout on a
Right.
major decision, and then we're told later how bad our city is. But we did not understand that 20 to 30% of the population made decisions for 100% of us because 70% of us didn't vote.
You know, that is those numbers that you just put out there is just so disheartening to listen. And then we set back, and I want to piggyback off of something. First of all, context is everything. To only hear what certain news stations are going to put on, and we take that as truths.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to understand that we need to get the whole picture or as much as we can. Now, we can get on social media, we can get on Instagram, we can get on Twitter, and we can look up everything else. But when it comes to something as crucial as to who is in the White House or who is in your political figures within your community, they deserve, like you said, that marriage. Don't just kiss and tell me goodbye or come around whenever you feel like it. And I also want to talk about also something that I think still puts us in this conversation is the barriers to access. We
Yes.
need to understand in some areas, especially those with predominantly black populations, that there are fewer polling stations, leading to long lines and wait times. Additionally, limited early voting hours can make it difficult for those with inflexible work schedules. So that combined with half truths and not putting things in context really hurts the black community, and it really hurts. And I think I can say this with a level of confidence in the field that I work in. It really damages and hurts, especially our black men. You know, we live in a society that, you know, we say that the man is the head, the man is the leader, and you know, when their pride is wounded, when their pride or they're not feeling like they are a part of the conversation. We know back in Jim Crow laws, you know, when they were talking about we were only three-fourths, I think, human or three-fourths, we were property, in
Yeah.
other words, you
Back
know,
when they were doing
and we're going to
establishing
go
voting.
there.
Yeah.
Yes. And we're going to go there when we talk about the psyche of how that is been embedded in our DNA to a certain extent on how we progress to move forward. You know,
Well,
we need, go ahead.
no, Howard, I think you make a valid point. When they were setting up the Constitution and all those wonderful things,
Hmm.
well, before we even got to Jim Crow, they had already said we were only a percent of a human. And
Exactly.
that
That's what,
was
right.
And that was only so that white landowners
Yes.
could have representation based on the
Right.
number of slaves they had, so
Right.
that they had more representatives in the government than the Senate. And so
Mm-hmm.
here's where your comment, I think, is so valuable in why we're asking, why do we not see Black men vote at different occasions, or men in general, but Black men in particular? I have a theory. So I am not as a certified professional as you are. I'm an observationalist. So I learn through observation and reconciliation of information. But what you notice is, for men, men love to feel as though they are in control and what they do makes a difference. If you can get a man to feel as though what he does not make a difference, he will disregard it because he doesn't want to seem like a
Mm-hmm.
failure. I would
Mm-hmm.
rather not do something than to be seen doing it and seem emasculated or ineffective.
True.
And so, if we have convinced men
Mm-hmm.
that they don't have any way to be in charge or take charge or be
Mm-hmm.
impactful
Mm-hmm.
in this governmental process,
Right.
then the sour grapes process, or the dissidence, causes
Mm-hmm.
us to reject this opportunity because it does not satisfy our understanding of leading, controlling, and guiding. And so when you have
Yeah.
men that
Yeah.
have become equated to the idea that that's the government, that's them, or
Right.
they are able to do things that I can't, instead of me trying to infuse and learn and break
Mm-hmm.
into this space, it is much easier for me to disregard the space or devalue the space so that I don't feel as though there's something that I don't have power in. And because of that,
I
that
agree.
stops
Yeah.
some engagement,
Yeah.
because we've been convinced
Right.
that we don't have the power. So therefore, in that illusion,
Mm-hmm.
we have been fooled not to use the power we have.
I wholeheartedly agree. And let me say this, sisters, my sisters out there, we are not discounting
No.
your your contribution, because if it weren't for our Black women in the Black community, a lot of things would have fallen by the wayside. But because we're talking about why Black men don't vote, and we're not discounting the sisters, we are really wanting to flesh out and really want to talk about how this affects the Black male. Um, we need to also understand, as I was talking a little bit about barriers and access, limited polling locations and hours. I want to also talk about voter purges. See, these are the things that we have to internalize, and we need to make it our own, and make sure that we don't just push it to the side, because we're very good at compartmentalization. And a lot of times we do that. We shut that door and we shut down. Why? Because maybe we didn't go to school. Maybe that has nothing to do with it. Because if you really want to find out something, you're going to find it.
That's
Okay.
right.
Black voters are sometimes disproportionately targeted in voting roll purges, where registered voters are removed from the list, often without adequate notification or cause. All of
Mhm.
these things are going on all at the same time. And we need to be aware of it, my brothers. We need to be aware of how the media, when you look at TV, when you look at the images that we have for Black men, it has gotten a little bit better. We still have a long ways to go. Let's look at the National Football League. There's still not a Black owner there, and I believe I did have some stats in another podcast that I had, but we're not owners, but we contribute over more than half of the makeup of the National Football League. And so those types of things of not being able to reach a certain pinnacle, if you will, of success starts to deteriorate and to erode our self-esteem. So
Well,
we really, really need to push back. We really need to say, hey, you know what? We live here. We're here. We have a vote. We have a voice. And I
yeah.
think that this is something that we have to continue to keep telling ourselves despite what's in front of us.
Well,
Go ahead.
Howard,
Go
no,
ahead.
I think you make some very valid points, and I want us to understand something as we look at this whole voting environment. If it was not important, then there would not be such an effort to dissuade it.
That's true. That's exactly right.
If there was not such a huge impact of minority
Hmm.
voting, then you wouldn't have the state of Texas putting more restrictions on Harris County than it does on any other county.
True.
When you look at how the voting laws are being rewritten
Hmm.
to make false analogies, to cause arguments
Hmm.
that support greater restriction.
It's a
So if you
distraction. Hmm.
it is. And it is a way, for example, when we look at all the new voter laws that came out about voter ID, we have to actually pause long enough to realize you couldn't vote without a valid form of ID before.
True. That's nothing new.
Right. What they did was make it a smaller gap, which
Hmm.
disenfranchised many older African American and minority individuals that might have had an expired license, but they did have a valid light bill. They had other things that they could utilize. People
Right.
that were illegal weren't voting.
True.
That became the red herring to make
Right.
these things.
Yeah.
But the truth is, it was really designed to disenfranchise people of color in minority neighborhoods. And when you
Mhm.
look at when they started purging rolls, we did not have all this emphasis on purging rolls until certain parties started losing elections
That's
and certain
exactly true.
states
Yeah.
started changing
Yes.
party affiliations.
Yes.
And when those in power felt as though their power was being lessened,
Hmm.
instead of embracing those that were being brought in, they
Hmm.
built walls, both
Hmm.
legally and physically, to
Right.
to disconnect them from the
Hmm.
opportunities that they were waking up to become a part of. And
True.
now, as you said, just in Tarrant County or in Texas,
Yeah.
there are many people that were purged that did not even know
No
that they weren't
notification at all.
purged. And,
True.
and the very smooth way that it was done, they weren't purged. Their registration was suspended. So it
Suspended.
doesn't
Right.
require the same notification. It
Right.
didn't require the same emphasis.
Right.
And so now you had people that luckily, we found out and we could put word out, but they would have come to the poll and had to vote provisionally
Hmm.
because they wouldn't have had a valid registration. And many people, that process of provisional, they get disencouraged and they'll leave and
Exactly.
not exercise
Yeah.
their right to vote. So this is a systemic issue that we have to put systemic things in place. And this requires us to become a part of the process, not just a part of the election. And I think that's kind of where you're getting to this idea of a bigger conversation.
Yeah. And that is why Empowering Global Ministries, I Am My Brother's Keeper podcast is here to be informative, to keep it 100. Um, and we need to understand this. This is something that is very serious. We, you know, I realize that it can get technical. I understand that it can get really convoluted with all the mixed messages and all the things that are not. Well, I'll just come out and just say it. All the lying and all the and it's a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to bring us back to this. Voting has made a difference for Black men specifically. And I want to, and the reason why I'm saying that is look at our history, our past. The 15th Amendment was passed and ratified in 1870. Over 500, I mean, I'm repeating it, but we need to hear it. We need to let this sink in. Over 500,000 Black men registered to vote across the South. 500,000 Black men voted. Let's move it a little bit further. Take the elections of district attorneys, for example. In some cities, we've seen prosecutors who are more willing to address issues like police accountability because voters showed up and demanded change. I'm going back to something else, and it's a part of the American history. In 2008 presidential election, nearly 60% eligible Black men voted, largely driven by President Barack Obama. Our look at the Affordable Health Care Act expanded health care coverage and benefit a lot of Black men who otherwise might have not had access. Voting gives us a say in who makes these decisions and how funds are allocated to our neighborhoods. If we are so hell bent on everything else, This is something that is tearing at the very fabric of the African, of the Black American family. Not only voter suppression, not only the things that Pastor Spears is saying. I mean, all of this stuff is tearing at the very fabric, and we are just kind of. And I'm not saying everybody, okay.
Mhm.
Let me be clear. I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying there's a very large number that are not taking this serious. The misinformation and distrust is also what you were talking about, I believe, too, Pastor Spears. There are documented efforts to spread false information about voting,
Well,
targeting Black communities, and
how
leading confusion. Go ahead.
No, Howard, we're seeing that very readily. And I think one of the things that we have to take the onus of, and I appreciate you having the podcast on this topic and others that are getting this information in the forefront, is because we have to start doing our own research. We have to start
It's true.
reading up and becoming informed on topics. And the
True.
reality is that elected officials
Mm-hmm.
answer to voters. So I want to make that really clear. Elected officials answer to voters, not to
Mm-hmm.
causes, not
True.
to neighborhoods,
True.
not to riots, not to protests. Elected officials answer to voters. When elected officials see people voting in blocks, when
Mm-hmm.
they see areas with higher vote turnout, they get involved. They listen to your calls, they respond. And
Mm-hmm.
so part of the self-fulfilling prophecy that nothing happens is because there is nothing that drives the politicians to recognize that our voice is valuable.
True.
Because there's one thing to yell, but as Mrs. Obama said, don't boo, vote.
Right.
And so when we don't vote, it disvalues, it undervalues our voices in our community. And this is why you don't see movement. Now, for example, when we did have activism around the Black Lives Matter movement and those other politically activated things, that
Mm-hmm.
people had larger turnouts, and elected officials saw that voters were upset,
Mm-hmm.
groups that vote were upset. You got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
conversations going,
Right.
and you got a lot of people paying attention. So we have to understand that when we don't vote, we don't just hurt ourselves by allowing the wrong candidates in office.
Mm-hmm.
We disconnect ourselves from any candidate being willing to listen.
True.
And so we have to do these things. And something else you said, Howard, I want to be really clear. We also have to make sure we're voting for ourselves. We
True.
can't let anyone else tell us how to vote. And even
True.
recently, and I'm just going to put it out there, we're both in ministry.
Right.
Um, Even recently, we had a particular pastor that chose to tell Black churches
Oh,
how they should vote,
yes.
and why they were wrong for not supporting the person, the non, well, let me remember my space, the person that they wanted to vote for.
Right.
And I think we have to be very careful, because sometimes we can allow our subgrouping or our affinities
Mm-hmm.
to box us into votes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to be very careful, because like you mentioned earlier, when we're hearing other people tell us what to do, it
Yeah.
reminds me very much
Yeah.
of when
Yeah.
Dr. King would come to the South, and
Mm-hmm.
the white pastors would
Mm-hmm.
tell the Black pastors, you
Mm-hmm.
don't want those rabble rousers in your church.
Right.
You should be affiliated with those troublemakers that are
Right.
coming in to stir up how
Right.
our community has always worked. And when I heard that recent preacher by title, I don't know by calling, and I won't go too
Okay.
far with that. But hey, people are following him. But
Yeah.
uh, when you hear things like that, you see again how the African American community and Christians in those communities are often pushed by rhetoric
Mm-hmm.
to vote against their own best interests.
Right.
And when you have someone outside of your community now trying to bully or
Mm-hmm.
browbeat your community
Mm-hmm.
into supporting a candidate that devalues your community, and tried to have 5 people that were innocent executed in New York
Yeah.
and still hasn't acknowledged it.
Yeah.
A person who,
Yeah.
when asked if they needed God and forgiveness, didn't really see where he did. There's an interview. You can go back and
Yeah.
look.
Yeah.
Uh, but because of other issues,
Mm-hmm.
certain people in a faith community are supporting him and upset that Black churches are looking for their own interests within a biblical context. And I just
Mm-hmm.
preached a message recently
Right.
about why we have a biblical responsibility to vote
Mm-hmm.
and a certain way that we have to vote for those that are poor, orphan, widowed, in
Mm-hmm.
prison,
Mm-hmm.
foreign, all those
Mm-hmm.
things that Jesus said he valued of those that he called sheep.
Right.
And so I think we have to be very careful that within the larger culture that we are tangentially attached to. I am an African American man, but I'm also a Christian. I'm
Mm-hmm.
also a pastor. I'm also a business professional. We have these other communities that we're a part of.
Right.
And sometimes those communities try to lean on us to
Mm-hmm.
do things that are not in our best interest. And we must be informed, we must be prayerful, and we must be engaged.
We need to pay attention to the signs that are around us. If I remember, um, I've been affiliated with 24, 24/7, or not 24/7, but I've been involved in larger ministries that are 7-day ministries,
Mhm,
mega churches.
mhm,
And you see our Caucasian counterparts show up during election time in order to be recognized as if that church is endorsing them.
mhm.
uh, but do we really know what their interest is? We
Right.
don't see them any other time coming to church or to visit or to be involved in things, only when it's concerning, like you were talking about, uh, voting. When it comes to voting for them to put them in a position, do they really have the Black agenda? Do they really have the Black interest at heart? I mean, this is something that we need to be asking ourselves when people are coming and we're putting them in the pulpit, or we're putting them, or we're endorsing them in a soft way. We may not
And
want to come
Howard,
out and just go ahead.
and we have to make sure that whether they are backing our agenda or not, we are.
True,
That we are holding them
true,
accountable.
true.
That if you're going to come to my community, you need to value my voice
Hmm.
and and accept and move on my concerns. Because we have to understand that every candidate is not a candidate for one community.
True.
There isn't. We would be upset if somebody said I'm running just to support the Hispanic community, or just to support the white community, or
Right.
just to support the Black community. Every politician that is elected to public office has to represent the entire community in that jurisdiction or precinct, but each community has to be an advocate for themselves. And we have to be able to go to the mayor's office, let them know we're listening, hold them accountable, show up in the city council meetings, let them know we're here, hold them accountable. How many of us are actually looking at the history of the can, like you said, doing the research,
Yeah.
and then after the election,
Right.
coming back to say,
Coming back.
okay, Mr. Martin,
Hmm.
you got my vote. You said you would do this. I'll be back in 3 months to see how that's happened. I'm sitting in the city
Hmm.
council meeting watching you vote, and I'm going to stand up for public comment and remind you that you said. Because until we can do that, we're going
Right.
to go through this really bad, I hate to say it like this, and this is going to
Say it.
sound slightly inappropriate, but that 2 o'clock in the morning, you up call whenever elections come around.
That's
And
right.
it's just like, I'll talk to you when I want something,
Right.
but don't visit me in public.
Right.
And so we have to not have a passing fling with politicians.
Hmm.
We need to have a committed relationship where everybody understands the expectations. And that starts with us first. I can only be misused, as Dr. King says, a person can only stand on your back until you stand up.
Right. As long as it's
We have
bent.
to stand up. As
Right.
long as it's bent, yes.
Yeah.
We have to
Yes.
stand up.
We need to also understand also, when we look at the past, Obama was, I'm sorry, President Obama was blamed for not looking for the Black agenda.
Mhm.
I mean, he couldn't just come out and just say that I'm here for the black community, and believe me, I'm not trying to sway, I'm not trying to politic, I'm just stating the facts. Okay.
Right.
You want to fact check that, you know. The thing of it is that he had to try to move within the context and within the circle that he could. He doesn't just make policy by himself. And that's
That's right.
why there's a lot of struggle, I believe, in my humble opinion, today when you're looking at someone who has third world country leaders on speed dial, and they're quick to say, "Well, I know them very well." Who in the world wants to say that the person that I have on speed dial has just executed somebody in their family, or they are doing something in order to dehumanize a people or to get their way? Okay,
Well,
I'm just putting that out there.
but
Okay,
Howard, here's the harsh reality of where we are, and again, not pulling one side or the other.
just
I
stating
have my
facts.
definite view on what I feel is important that I've prayed about and where I'm voting, but
Mhm.
I think it's an indictment on our system when you have so diametrically different candidates and it's still close. This
True.
tells you that there is an
Yeah.
underpinning in the
Yeah.
minds of parts of America
Yes.
that either support these things
Yes.
that we as a country say are not good, that we
Right.
say as a country are not
Right.
proper,
Hmm.
or they have an aversion to characteristics or things that they won't admit that they're scared of or worried about.
True.
And and we have to be honest that there's so much subtext to each of these elections.
Hmm.
When even within the local races, and I want to make sure we understand this, it's not just a presidential season. Even
Right.
in the local races, where you hear people speaking against their own best interests
Hmm.
because a candidate seems to have this aura about them, but there is no evidence that that person is doing a good job. You can leave the country during a freeze and
Hmm.
still have a close race.
Right.
That's like somebody who abuses you but brings you flowers and you bring them back. But we have this kind of relations with politicians. And so we have to be very careful
Hmm.
that we are engaging this process with our eyes wide open and understanding where we've closed our ears or not been informed properly and get past these internal conflicts that allow for us to pretend we don't see where someone is completely wrong. I will say, last thing I'll say, I don't agree wholeheartedly with any candidate. Let me be very
True.
clear.
True.
I vote by value. I vote by issue. I don't vote by party.
Hmm.
And I think anytime we see these ideologues on either side, we see that there's a disingenuousness to it. I
Hmm.
can say, as much as I supported Obama and I appreciated things he did, I didn't agree with everything he did.
True.
And when we can be honest enough to say that we have real conflict, but we're working out the dissidents
Hmm.
to find reconciliation about where we are on policies
Hmm.
and thoughts and become engaged, then we can actually honestly vote. And that's part of where within our communities, we haven't done that.
Well, I agree. I think that there's so many hidden agendas, and people are not being honest with themselves and with others.
Mhm.
I think is an issue. Everybody wants to talk about how America is God's country or God's people and everything, but whenever you buy into somebody's ideology, or you're supporting them, and you're looking at issues concerning abortion and women's rights to have freedom over their own bodies and everything, and you're wanting to put a ban, or you're wanting to put some control on it, or you're wanting to crunch the numbers or whatever, you have to really stop and think, what is the hidden agenda here? You have, what is pushing that? And that's very important that we, especially as the black community, we have to always be thinking What's behind that? We cannot be superficial. We cannot afford to be superficial. We've
Well,
always got to be looking at the depth. Go ahead,
it
Pastor.
goes back to what you were saying about historical brainwashing. I hate to use that term, but that's the best way I can think of it.
That's
Historical mental conditioning, I should say,
yes,
because
yes,
even when we had Juneteenth and we had the separation of ownership of people that were enslaved, there was still propaganda to the idea of, but why would you want to leave? Why would you want to leave this good master that has done so well by you?
right,
Why
right,
why do you want to be free? Isn't it better to be here where you have a place? And there were people that fell for
yeah,
that belief.
yeah,
And even now we have things where people are trying to get us around one issue. I mean,
right,
abortion is one of those issues.
right,
You if you're a Christian, you cannot vote for any pro-life candidate, a pro-choice candidate. But here's the thing: you have to also say what are all the issues that
right.
are on the environment? Am I pro-life or am I pro-birth? And a lot of our people out there are pro-birth. They're concerned about the child being born. They're not concerned about the child living a full and productive life. And I think that we have to understand that when we look at the issues that we vote on and we try to get painted into a corner, you've got to wonder, why would one group hang on one issue and try to distract you from realizing healthcare is an issue,
All the
economics is
issues.
an issue,
Right,
policing is an issue,
right.
uh, poverty is an issue, environmental change is an issue. There are tons of issues that affect people that are living every day. And if
Right,
I'm truly pro-life, then I have to be pro all life
right.
and pro the things that are the living. And
Hmm.
so we have to be careful because things sound really good in rhetoric.
Right.
You can't do this and believe. And we hear a lot of our evangelical leaders that
Yeah.
say things like, well, you can't believe in God and vote this way. And it's funny because if you read the text, it's the Christian, we're both Christians. So
Yes.
if you read the text,
Hmm.
what you find is that the things that God is more concerned about is how I'm treating people every day.
Every day.
And I need to see and support policies that treat people well every day. I need to, as a Christian, go back and look at what are the areas that Christ said were important.
Hmm.
How do we handle foreigners? I mean, I'm not picking one side or the other, but
Right.
what's the foreign policy? Well, let's look at the specific things that the Bible does talk about. How do we treat? He said, "Be kind to the foreigner, be kind to the stranger, because you were once strangers in Egypt." So if I look at two candidates and I see one that denigrates foreigners and disenfranchises foreigners and
Hmm.
vilifies foreigners,
Hmm.
and I look at another candidate that says we need to embrace and support foreigners, then I got to say, which one of those is a Christian view? Which one
Right.
of those sounds like Moses that tried to free the enslaved
Hmm.
and bring them forward? Or which one sounds like the Pharaoh that knew not Joseph and vilified the children of Israel and said, if we're not careful, their invasion will kill us?
True.
And I'm paraphrasing, but
Right.
the language is similar.
Hmm.
So we have to ask ourselves which candidate is going to have concern for the youth, not just the unborn,
True.
but those that are going to school. Which candidate is going to make sure that there's food
Hmm.
for that child that we wanted to make sure was born?
Hmm.
Eat. Which candidate is going to make sure that that child that we wanted to make sure was born has an education? Which candidate is going to put programs in place so that that teen and young adult don't get pregnant because they
Right.
have reason to value their future, value their
Hmm.
education. And
Hmm.
so I don't have to fight over abortion if there isn't an unwanted pregnancy. And
True.
I stop unwanted pregnancy
Right.
by how I get people to value themselves and not be
Right.
willing to take risks and value who they are in Christ, which is the church's job. And if I do that, I need people that are going to fund programs that support those young people having jobs, opportunity, and education. So am I looking at candidates? Does that candidate have a
Hmm.
profile that will help people get a college education, defer college debt, that will defer making sure that schools have funding? Or do I have candidates that say we're not going to fund schools and have ISDs closing because we have an
Right.
overflow in the state, but we
Hmm.
won't release the money to the schools
Right.
until they follow the mandate to take money from schools. So I think we have to be really mindful when we look at this and understand that
Hmm.
there's so much on the line
Right.
in this vote, and we cannot take it lightly, because when we don't speak, those that speak for us won't speak for us.
And when we don't vote, you know,
Our vote is our voice.
we're real quick to set up here, and a lot of us want to set up here and complain. But what are you a part of the problem, or are you a part of the solution?
Mm-hmm.
The historical disenfranchisement, the long history of systemic racism, and the exclusion from the political process. It's fostered a deep root of distrust, especially in the Black community, but especially with Black men. The
Mm-hmm.
disillusionment with political leaders, their perception for political leaders, regardless of party, often make promises that don't lead to anything tangible. And I think you were talking about this earlier. You can't expect to do a light switch. Um, um, how did you? I'm loosely paraphrasing what you said, but you were
Sure.
talking about nothing's going to change overnight, and you've
Correct.
got to be able to ride this train all the way. But you've got to be informed. Okay, you've
That's
got to
right.
be in context, and you've got to be informed about what it is. Something else I want to bring up is about mental health.
Yes.
There needs to be a lot of things done within the mental health field, so far as for dollars, youth dealing with mental health, with depression and suicide. I mean, these things have really got to be, I believe, in my opinion, needs to be on the agenda of these politicians that are out there. When we look at the Uvalde killing of those children, that's just that's just so hurtful to know that the police were there and did not enter the bill. I mean, these things are important. You didn't have a law officer on that door at that time, and it was due to funding cuts. So I want to keep it moving. It's 7:53. I'm trying to move us along, but this is very good conversation. I also want to talk about the feelings of marginalization and lack of empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Also dealing with my brothers, a sense of powerlessness due to systemic issues and economic marginalization. Some Black men may feel that individual votes do not matter, and we've been talking about this all evening. We have got to stop thinking with that type, and it's the word I want to use, but I'm not going to use it, that certain type of mentality
Yes, sir.
that has us. And I think you alluded to that when you were talking about why we want to leave when we've got it so good here. You can physically remove somebody, but if they have not been mentally free of whatever it is they've been traumatized about, they're still in slavery.
Most
They're
definitely.
they're still being captive. You know what I'm saying? Internalized belief that voting isn't for them. Voting is for everybody, and if we would stop being narcissistic in some of us and looking at ourselves and thinking about only ourselves and our agenda, when it's all should be all of our agenda, especially within the Black community. We really need to take the I out of that. There's no I in team. You know what I'm saying? We need to be a team. Well, go ahead, Pastor Spears. I know you
No,
want to
no,
chime in.
Howard. I love where you're going with that. And I think this is how we have to start rewriting what was written wrong. And we have been given the story, even from each other, that this doesn't work. We've
Mhm,
been given the story
mhm.
that, this is not our system. And I understand. I've taken classes on critical conversations on race. I understand
Mhm.
systemic white racism. I
Right,
understand that.
right.
Here's the thing that we have to understand: there is also intra systemic white racism, where
True.
we have begun to adopt these ideas and
Ye-
perpetuate them among ourselves.
Are we
And
conscious of it? Are we conscious of it, Pastor Spears?
sometimes, here's the thing: people that stink don't know they smell because they're used to it. So thinking over time becomes normalized, and nobody knows it smells because everybody's sharing it.
Everybody's
And
used to
so
it.
it becomes this mantra, even a badge of honor, where people say, I'm not voting, they don't. And they're like, yeah, you're right. That don't.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Here's the thing. You can hold an elephant with a rope
Right.
because he's been conditioned to believe he doesn't have the power to make
Exactly.
change.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look
Mm-hmm.
at our communities, we must begin by example.
Right.
I'm like I've said, and I
Right.
call every pastor to do the
Right.
same thing.
Right.
Pastors need to lead. Our congregation, I made the announcement in our church. We're going to go together to the polls on
Mm.
Sunday. Every
Mm.
leader
That's
needs
powerful.
to lead in what you're directing them to do. So we say
In
vote
some way.
in some way. If
Everybody doesn't have a congregation, but there's, and I didn't mean to
but
cut you off.
every leader, that's why they say
Right.
every pastor,
Right. Right.
every leader
Right.
needs to lead
Mm-hmm.
where you're directing people.
Right.
So if you are the leader of your home, if you're the leader on your job,
Exactly.
you
Good.
need, if I'm
Yes.
telling you that voting is important, you need to
Yes.
see me vote. And then I need
Yes.
to bring you with me. And then I need to show you why I vote.
True.
When we were younger parents, we brought our children to the poll with us. They
Right.
watched us vote. We talked about what we were voting for. My daughter called recently and asked,
Mm-hmm.
Mom, who we voting for this time? Let's talk
Right.
about it. And
Right.
so we have to lead them there.
Let's talk
And
about
then
it.
we have to show everyone
Right.
how to do this.
Right.
So I think what you're doing right now, Howard, I want to applaud you for taking the time
Listen.
to put a
Listen.
voice out there
Listen.
and say, we need to talk about this.
Right.
We can't sit by and let
Right.
our cousin who,
Mm-hmm.
has decided that this thing don't work
Right.
to continue in that misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be activists within our community. You don't
True.
have to be on the side. You don't have to be calling everybody's house. If not comfortable with
No.
that, be an activist in your home. How
True.
about this? Call your relatives and
Right.
ask them, have they voted yet?
Right.
If they say no, then say, hey, I'm going to the polls on
Right.
tomorrow.
Right.
Can I pick you up on the way?
Right.
Can I? When I grew up, my grandmother was the first African American woman elected to the state legislature in Louisiana.
Okay.
I grew up watching
Oh, okay.
people engage in grassroots politics.
Right.
Now here's what we've missed. We've had grassroots propaganda ever since. And they have been working small
Mm-hmm.
ways through
Mm-hmm.
music, through entertainment, through
Mm-hmm.
social to get
Mm-hmm.
us to undo what those and our ancestors
Mm-hmm.
tried to do. And so we're going to have to do the same approach. We're going to have to do grassroots to re-inform for the renewing of our minds.
Right. Okay.
So we have to do that by precept, example, and engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So Howard, I appreciate what you're doing. I hope everybody listening, if they listen now or listen later,
Yes.
that they will get with someone. If you haven't voted yet, bring somebody with you. If you have voted already, check on the other people you know and see if they have, because I want you to understand, and Howard, I know we're at time. I want everyone
We're
to
good. We're
understand
good. Keep
that
going.
your vote is your opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
do what God has put you here to do
Right.
in this season, in
Mm-hmm.
this time.
Time.
And I just preached to our congregation.
Mm-hmm.
We misunderstand this idea when they ask Jesus about taxes, and he says, give unto Caesar
What
that
is
which
it?
is Caesar's, give
Right.
unto God that which is God.
It's not.
But I need you to understand something. He did not tell them not to give unto Caesar.
True.
He said you have to be involved in both processes.
That's right.
You have to do what is responsible of you in both processes.
And
And
put God first.
if God allowed us
Yes.
to be born
Mm-hmm.
post-Civil War, post-civil rights,
Right.
in this time where we have the right and responsibility to vote, that is not a
Mm-hmm.
mistake. We have purpose, and we must vote with that purpose,
That's
because
good
not
word.
only is our vote our voice as
That's good word.
Christians,
That's
our
good
vote
word.
is his voice.
Good
And
word.
we need to make sure
That's good.
that as we pray, we support
Mm-hmm.
candidates that will make sure that those that are the least of ours are
Mm-hmm.
covered by the funds that we collectively as a society put together. And our vote will determine who prosecutes, who educates, and who
Mm-hmm.
legislates our communities.
That's good. That's good, Bishop. That's good. We're here at the close here, and I just want to put this out here, and we're not going to be able to delve into it as I would hoped, but I mentioned earlier about the black man's psyche,
Mhm.
and we really can't get into it, but I just want to hit some things, some notes that I've taken about learned helplessness,
Mhm.
historical oppression and exclusion over time, repeated exposure to systemic disenfranchisement and discrimination can lead to a sense of learned helplessness,
Mhm.
apathy as a defense mechanism, internal racism and stereotypes. I mean, all of these things are pressuring the Black community and especially our Black men. Mistrust and trauma. There's a lot of trauma behind this. Look at the Tuskegee experiment. Look at all the things that have gone on with people that are in positions of authority and places that we are supposed to trust. I work in the mental health field. African Americans don't readily go to mental illness or go to therapists and stuff, and because of things like this, the mistrust, that's trauma. So I just want to lay that on you, that is constantly in our psyche. But we, as Pastor Spears is talking about, we got to push forward. We have to lead. And if you don't know, be prepared. You know what? There was a Sunday, um, a lady in my church in Wichita, Kansas, and I never will forget. She says, "Preach what you gonna preach, know it, and sit down." So, in other words, she's saying, do your research,
Mhm.
do your studying. Don't talk about nothing that you don't know nothing about or you're not confident about. But whatever it is, know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And so I'm saying a lot of us aren't. We didn't have that that you had, Pastor Spears, of seeing that as a child and your grandmother in Louisiana and everything. A lot of us haven't been exposed to that. There's a lot of us that may have. I wasn't. So I just want to end this by saying that we need to be shaping the future for the next generation.
Mhm.
It's imperative. Our children, our grandchildren, our great great grandchildren. The act of voting is about more than the present, it's about creating a better future. Voting allows Black men to advocate for policies that promote educational equity, economic opportunity, and fair treatment under the law. It is a way to ensure that the future generations do not have to face the same systemic challenges that we're always going to be dealing with it because of our melanated skin. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But we've got to continue to move forward. We've got to be informed. We've got to use things in context, okay? And I'm going to end this. Representation and role models is so important. It's not the NFL player, it's not the NBA player, and I'm not criticizing those brothers for being the athletes that they are. And a lot of them are doing a lot of good things in the community and giving back. But even not on that level, it can start, like you said, Pastor Spears, here at home.
Mhm.
Lead at home. Be informed at home. It's not just running, seeing little Johnny running up and down the field. The adversary is already taken up Sunday to where it's not a day of rest. It's not a Sabbath. It's not whatever your beliefs are. Everybody's not have church on Sunday. But what I'm saying is that you got to make time for God in your life if you're going to call yourself a Christian. Okay.
Mhm.
More Black men engage in the political process, the more they encourage others in their community to participate. And it sends a powerful message to younger generations about the importance of civic engagement and the power of the voices. And I'm going to call this a call to action. Voting is powerful. It's a way to honor the past, address the present, and shape the future. But it's also about representation. When more Black men vote, it sends a message that the community is engaged, that its voices matter and its concerns deserves to be heard. So when you get that ballot, remember it's not just a piece of paper, it's a tool of change, and we should use it. We're gonna close this thing out, man. I mean, this we got a lot of stuff in here, and our prayer tonight is that whenever you listen to this, and we believe by calling those things that be not as though they were, we believe that everybody is going to come across this podcast and feel the presence of the Lord on this, and that it affects change. Okay, Black men, get out there and vote. Everybody get out there and vote. I'm going to ask Pastor Spears to take us out of here with a word of prayer.
All right. Father, we thank you for your grace. Thank you for your power. And God,
Yes.
we understand that power is not just an exuding of energy, but power is the ability to do. And
Yes.
God, we thank you for the ability to do your will in
Yes.
this season.
Yes.
Father, we ask that as we have tried to admonish and encourage and uplift your children,
Yes.
specifically your Black brothers and
Yes.
sons, God,
Yes.
we ask that this message, this time, be uplifting and encouraging and informative and inciting of
Yes.
those that will hear, that it will incite in them the desire to be involved, to be engaged, and to let their vote be your voice. God, we are desiring, as your word says, to provoke them to good works. So, God, we ask that you bless our host. Lord, thank you for giving him the inspiration to want to
Yes,
engage
Lord.
this topic at a time where we haven't learned how to peacefully reason together. He was
Yes.
willing to step out and encourage your people to take advantage of the opportunities you've given us.
Yes.
Let this podcast continue to go well.
Yes.
Let the audience receive the
Yes.
heart and the intention of the host.
Yes. That's right.
God, be with us as we go forward to
Yes.
do those things that you have specifically allowed us to be born
Yes.
and empowered to do
Yes.
in
Yes.
this present day.
Yes.
Watch over and bless each every person that's listened or that will
Yes.
listen, and let
Yes.
grace and mercy
Yes.
be upon us all. In
Yes.
Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. This is Empowering Global Ministries. This is I Am My Brother's Keeper podcast, and we will be back at another time. So keep your Facebook on and be looking because we're going to come with some more topics, and we're going to keep it 100. God bless and have a good night.